This week I had a really interesting chat with Paul Oneid. He's a strength and conditioning coach known as one of the best here in the city. He's had multiple years of experience coaching collegiate and professional athletes. And in this discussion, we talked about game day prep and all the prep actually leading up to a game. So the days before, the weeks before, your habits and different tools and tips that you can be using to optimize your preparation. Preparation has such a big impact on your actual performance in the task. So if you're able to max out your preparation and do all the things right, your performance in the actual task is going to be so much better, whether it's a soccer game, a test, an interview. In this video, we specifically talk about a game day prep. So we get into sleep, nutrition, and a lot of different topics. Paul has so much knowledge throughout his experience, and there's a lot of value in this talk, so I really hope you enjoy. Game day preparation is probably something that is so underrated. Often the preparation is what actually gets you the results in the game. So what should the first 24 hours leading up to a game look like? And then you can also touch on the days before a game to optimize your performance on the field.
Sure. As we approach preparation, you have to think of it as a whole. So it's not just the game day itself, it's not just the 24 hours previous, it's the habits and behaviors that you've established throughout your training cycle, throughout your preseason.
Okay.
So if we're approaching any game, that day before shouldn't be very much different than any day of training. There should be something going on, you should be active. Prior to that, we look at exercise intensity and duration. Those should all be dropping in preparation for the game. So we should still be focusing on explosiveness. We should still be focusing on keeping ourselves snappy and fresh.
Yeah.
But the volume of work definitely needs to come down to accommodate recovery. When we talk about nutrition, I don't like to change many variables. So if you're the type of person who doesn't have a necessarily clean diet, you're not going to get better by cleaning up your diet 24 hours out of the game. What you can do is you can be mindful of your intake. So we know that soccer is an aerobic sport. So in an aerobic sport, our primary fuel sources are going to be carbohydrates and fatty acids. The thing with fatty acids is they can delay digestion. So leading into a game, you want to not minimize fats, but you don't want to bias your diet towards them. Protein should be quite moderate, as it should be throughout. So no changes there. And your carbohydrate intake should come up.
Okay.
We want to stick with whole food, single ingredient sources, fruits and vegetables, and then rice, potatoes, sweet potatoes, oatmeal, those types of foods that digest easily. And that's going to be individual for the person. Something that doesn't necessarily get talked about on the nutrition side a lot is sodium.
Okay.
So if we're going to be sweating, we're going to be excreting a lot of electrolytes, we need to replenish our sodium levels. We can drink all the water we want, but if we're not having those electrolytes put back in, we're not going to hold on to that water. It's going to further deplete us, further imbalance our electrolytes. You get cramping, you get poor muscle contractions, you get cognitive fatigue. So a good rule of thumb is to just salt your food to taste. And then when you're preparing for a game, I like to have a game day drink with some carbohydrates in it.
Okay.
A good rule of thumb that I like to have is for your 90-minute game, you should have around 100 grams of carbohydrates through that period. The reason for that, and it's funny, I use the diabetic guidelines. So if someone has diabetes and they're doing exercise, it's about 10 to 15 grams of carbohydrates per 10 minutes of exercise.
Okay.
So that doesn't necessarily mean you need to be drinking 100 grams of sugar.
Yeah.
It just means throughout the pre, during, and mid-game, I like to have a snack for my athletes mid-game, you should be having around 100 grams of carbohydrates, trace fats. That meal before your game should have a little bit of fats to slow the digestion. Carbohydrate sources should be slower digesting. Some potatoes, some rice, even pasta if you're able to digest it. But that should be the focus. I know that's quite a broad answer, but it's going to vary based on the individual.
Of course,
It's also going to vary based on the position, your playing time.
Yeah.
You know, if you're the type of athlete who isn't necessarily a starter or might play 15 to 20 minutes per game, you may not need 100 grams of carbohydrates to fuel those 20 minutes of gameplay. but you do want to be prepared and you want to be primed so that when you are called upon, your performance can be at the highest level.
Interesting. And then do you have any recommendations in terms of those drinks, like a Gatorade, a fresh juice, a smoothie?
So you want to look at the type of carbohydrate is quite important. So if you're going to go with a fruit or a smoothie of some kind, fruit does have fiber in it, and it's also a mixture of glucose and fructose. So when you're, not to overcomplicate it, but fructose is primarily digested in the liver, and it's not necessarily well absorbed by the muscles. So if you are going to have a drink, it should contain some glucose, which is a simple carbohydrate. Gatorade would be a source of glucose, or any like Tang or any sugary drink. Then with the fructose, there can be a mix. There's actually quite a bit of research done to say that mixing sources of carbohydrate together increases the amount of carbohydrate that can be absorbed. So a drink that has glucose, fructose, even something like a cyclic dextrin, which is more of a supplemental carbohydrate source, mixing them together can actually improve your performance quite a bit. So what I like to say is the drink that you drink should be sugary, and then have a piece of fruit at halftime to get those glycogen stores in the liver replenished.
Yeah.
The goal with the sugary drinks is not to necessarily improve performance, but it's to delay the onset of fatigue. You ever felt that crash that you have a little bit during a workout? Essentially what that is, it's the body switching from muscle glycogen stores to liver glycogen stores. It's a bit of a slower process to mobilize those carbohydrates. So by keeping your blood sugar elevated through the drink, you delay the onset of dipping into those liver glycogen stores, and it delays that fatigue.
Interesting. And then in terms of that big meal before a game, I know 3 to 4 hours is a common idea out there. What's your take on that?
So it depends what time the game's at. If it's let's say it's an afternoon game, maybe around 1 p.m. start time, you're going to want to have a big breakfast. That breakfast could be a little bit higher in fats, biased towards carbohydrates, moderate protein. Looking at digestion, it should be foods you know you can digest. You're not going to mix anything fancy in that day, but you also don't want to go to a diner and have a really greasy, fatty breakfast, because it's going to just upset your stomach. About 3 to 4 hours before the game is a good time to have a moderate sized meal. You don't want to be empty during the game, but you also don't want to be full. Pre-workout, you should have a snack. There should be some nutrients coming in. You want to keep those glycogen stores full, but you don't want to be bogged down with digestion. Whenever we eat, it brings blood to the digestive tract. It brings fluid into the digestive tract. And we all know that if you've eaten too close to the game, you feel slow, you feel sluggish. You don't have that pep in your step. There's a good balance to be had. You never want to be hungry. So if you eat 3 to 4 hours, if you're used to eating every 3 hours, like ideally I would have an athlete eating every 3 to 4 hours. Well, if you're eating 3 hours before the game, your game time is an hour and a half, plus all stoppages, plus halftime, plus time between the end of the game and the time you sit down, you're going 7-8 hours without eating maybe. That's also not great. So having a small meal before, having a snack at half, and then having a drink during first half and second half, maybe even split half and half, is a great idea just to keep you fueled.
Paul, thank you so much. A lot of value. Let these guys know where they can find you and learn more about you.
Absolutely. You guys can find me on Instagram at Paul Oneid, PAULONEID, or my website, www.masterathletic.com.